I recommend the Caro-Kann defense quite a bit from the black side. One of the best systems for white is the advanced variation, and it can cause players some problems. So I'm going to show you a couple different systems you can play from the black side, 3c5 and 3 bishop f5. Then I'm going to talk you through what I recommend and why. So the Caro-Kann starts out e4, c6, d4, d5. E5 is the advanced variation. This has become trendy in the last few years, and the reason it's become so popular is because it scores well at the master level, grandmaster level, and the engines like it too. So the most common move historically has always been bishop to f5. I've played this quite a bit in my chess career, played it from the white side and from the black side, and honestly, I like this better from the white side. And the reason why is there's so many different systems you can play from the white side, and that bishop on f5 can become an exposed piece. So even though in the Caro-Kann we like to get that bishop outside of the pawn chain, we don't want a French defense looking position, the bishop becomes a target in these lines. Look at what it's doing on f5. It's just floating out here in space, right? There's nothing on this diagonal that it's really attacking. It's not pinning a knight on f3. The bishop isn't really doing much out there. It's just out there to get outside the pawn chain. So if white plays knight to f3, this is called the short variation. I think it's one of the strongest ways for white to play this system. Now after e6, black kind of gets what they were playing for, bishop outside of this pawn chain. But now let's say bishop to e2 was played, knight d7, black will eventually want c5. After castle, knight e7, knight b to d2, h6. White can now play knight to b3. And this is a system that scores really well for white. At the higher levels, white is winning 43% to black's 31%. And the reason why is because white's controlling the position. Look at how cramped black is back here. Where's the black pawn break coming from? Oftentimes, black needs to play g5, which is a bit of a desperation move. Yes, it's aggressive. You're trying to attack the white king, but you're attacking from a passive position. And I've played these positions quite a bit from the black side, and I don't score well in them. They might be something that'll work for you, but I honestly think it's too difficult to play. White's really getting what they want in this structure. So this is just one variation that white could do. It's called the short variation, but there's other systems too. White can play knight to c3 on move 3. This is sometimes called the Shirov attack. Chess.com calls it the Vanderweel attack. After e6, g4, kicking this bishop right away. Bishop retreats, and now h4 could be played, threatening to trap the bishop. But most common is knight to e2, and this knight can head to f4, attacking the bishop, or h4 can come later. So we can see that that bishop on g6, originally on f5, is getting kicked around a lot. That bishop is not having fun, and it doesn't really serve a purpose out there either. Why do we want this type of position? It's a very good question. We got to ask ourselves that. Why do we want that bishop out on f5? All right, let's look at another system white could play, an immediate h4. This is called the Tal variation. I kind of like this one for white. Now black has to play either h5 or h6. h5 is the most common because we're trying to prevent g4. If you play h6, it's a more passive version. And the idea is after g4, the bishop could still tuck away on h7. Let's look at h5. On to h5. White can now play c4. And look at this space that white is gaining. And this bishop is still floating out here on f5, not doing much. So e6, knight c3. Knight e7. This bishop is blocked in, and where's the future for this knight? It's getting in the way of that bishop on f5. They don't work well together. Now, after knight g to e2, white is winning 52% in the master database to 25% for black. So white is winning twice as often as black after knight e2. Knight d7, and again, look at this passive setup. Knight's on d7, e7, the king's sitting on e8. Like, how is black getting out of this? Knight to g3 by white, hitting the bishop, and double attacking this pawn on h5. This is just getting really uncomfortable, and now that bishop is sort of a tall pawn, stuck between two pawns. Bishop to g5 is the most common, hitting that knight to the queen. And really, I think white's having all the fun in this position. So all of these lines we've looked at, in my opinion, the game is kind of in white's court. White gets to pick which variation they want. That bishop on f5 is always getting harassed, kicked around. It's just not something that I want to play. So what I've started playing pretty early on in my Caro-Kann career was 3c5. And this didn't used to be a very popular option, but now more and more people are seeing success with it, especially at the club level. And the engines seem to like it. So newer iterations of Stockfish and the strongest engines are saying, hey, this move is not so bad, right? Whereas previously, 3c5 was just thought of as a sideline. White could take this pawn on c5 and score pretty well. Well, actually, there's a lot of good systems for black after taking on c5. And I think the best options for white are to try to just play for a very small advantage here. So I'll show you that system. First, let me show you some of the more common stuff. At the club level, you'll see c3 more often than any other move. That's another reason I like playing 3c5 for black, because 4c3 is played more often than anything else. And here we can simply play knight c6, and we kind of get this like French defense structure, but that bishop is not trapped behind the pawn yet. Oftentimes you'll see knight f3, and you can simply put that bishop out there on g4, pinning the knight. Another way you could play this is c takes d, bishop g4. But if let's say you play here, your opponent plays bishop e2, then you play e6. Now you get this French defense position with the bishop on a useful square on g4, with the knight already hitting d4. Everything is going according to plan for black. Black is winning 58% in the master database to only 19% for white. So I don't know why a master level player would play this from the white side, but you'll see it all the time from the club level. So at this point, let's look at c5 again. You could play d takes c5 here. This is the most common master move. And what we recommend in the ChessGoals Caro-Kann course is pawn to e6, getting ready to simply capture this back right away. The strongest move for white is a3, and white has to really know their theory to play a3. It's a complicated line, but black is still doing pretty well on those lines. And what we recommend is taking the pawn and coming back to e7 after b4 is played. Bishop to e3, though, is much more common at the club level, trying to hold on to this pawn. Now we can play knight to d7, attacking both of these pawns at the same time. And after bishop to b5, we have queen to c7. And again, these pawns are going to drop. So this is what happens. We're able to win the pawns back, and we can try to make a position where the weakest pawn on the board is white's. So even though we have that bishop that's kind of trapped on c8 temporarily, the e5 pawn becomes a huge weakness, and c5 is a weakness. We're going to get at least one of them back, sometimes both of them with no compensation for white. So I really like these lines with the early c5. This is what we recommend in the Caro-Kann course, and I put together a playlist of Caro-Kann advanced videos that we have on the ChessGoals YouTube channel. It includes 2 videos that are between 50 minutes and 60 minutes long. One of them is on c3, where Jesse Buss and I go through and give you a full repertoire, 10 lines at the club level, what to play. And then another one of the videos is on other moves, including d takes c. That's another 50 to 60-minute video. Then there's 8 other videos in this playlist that go through common mistakes at the club level, quick victories, and some other tips. I go through a couple opening questions and give you add-on advice that aren't in the long videos. So hopefully you check out that playlist. It's going to be a box up here. See what you think, and enjoy the Caro-Kann. Play 3c5, and thanks for watching.